Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sirhan on X. As I'm coming to you live tonight from Cincinnati, Ohio, in the United States of America, on this 8th of September 2025. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful 3-day weekend. And there is, of course, opening kickoff on the first Sunday of the NFL. All 32 fans of all 32 teams. Hope everyone had themselves a wonderful day and enjoy the games because it's always the most beautiful time of year that the NFL game does come around and everyone's excited. Uh, of course, we have the good, the bad, the pretty, the ugly throughout the entire NFL schedule. For your newbies out here, they know me for the boxing content. I'll touch on a historical moment later. This year, I made a promise to myself I will divulge more NFL related during this time of year, like I did last year. For recaps, I just take the games, break it down. This one will be more simple because I'm going to talk about standouts, fantasy, etc., etc. And we can go on from there. The good, the bad, the pretty, the ugly, and everything in between, because there's a lot of that across the entire NFL landscape. I'm going to touch on, of course, the collapse in Baltimore at the end of the show and the theory of winning versus not losing. And, of course, everybody's favorite part after week one, Overreaction Monday, especially after week one. I'm going to shoot a lot of you guys down here later. But I'm going to get right down to it here real quick. I'm going to break down each particular game. Actually, the real good one that took place in Atlanta was, of course, Tampa beating Atlanta. First time in about like 4 games, because I think Atlanta won 3 straight before yesterday. The thing about this one is, welcome to the NFL, Emeka Egbuka, because you made this difference. Your 2 touchdowns won the game for the Buccaneers. The fiery leader, Baker Mayfield, shows why. Once again, the standouts of the NFL season, as we talked about with Tampa Bay and Cleveland, that situation. But right off real foot was Tampa Bay. They were my pick to represent the NFC earlier this season, simply because I like the offense and how they run. But Baker Mayfield came alive and showed why he's continuing to evolve as a quarterback. And I said all along, the chemistry he has with those receivers, and now you add a Becca to that bunch, especially with Chris Godwin out for the first 4 games, that offense is going to be pretty just fine. Defense played very well as the game went on. They know they're going to have to be more consistent as the weeks go on. Atlanta did all they could. They invested in the defense. Job well. They did all the best they could. Problem is the offense was so uneven outside of the long run by Bijan Robinson. But I think that they made an investment in the defense. They played well enough until the last minutes where basically they were all over the place, and Baker Mayfield just found a way to clinch that game. So Atlanta's going to be fine. And, of course, Atlanta wasn't choked the quarterback out of the kicker for missed kicks over the last down the stretch. Koo's still one of the more reliable kickers, just one of those things. But Tampa gets the road win. I said they were going to win 12, 13 games this season. They got work to do, obviously, on offense, but it is week one. I'm not one of like a bunch of all the fan bases out there who think that week one's the end all be all. They're going to be fine. Atlanta's a work in progress. I like what they did on defense. They're going to get better. Of course, the big one here in Cincinnati, because I saw that your comment. I want to touch on it real quick. It was the wild one over in Cleveland. Wild, but also dirty and muck it up between the Bengals and the Browns. This is what I fully expected. The Bengals to get the win, but it was going to be ugly. Because I said, there's a secondary that can find a way to slow down the Bengals' top 2 receivers, Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. It's always been the Browns' secondary, and they basically dared the Bengals to beat them every single other way possible. The numbers won't bear it out, but they got the win. Of course, the kicker missed the extra point and the gimme field goal, which basically was a difference in the game. I can point to all the positives and the negatives on this one, but the biggest one moving forward is here we go again, year 6. How are they going to protect Joe Burrow? Because who can forget that series? 3 straight sacks, twice, basically 2 of them were really forced by Myles Garrett. The third one, he had the key piece of it. Largely because they overpaid Orlando Brown Jr. to think they can get to stop Myles Garrett, which he can't even stop the statue. And that's how that basically going to be another issue moving forward. The play of the game, that basically this game saver was Joe Burrow escaping the end zone to avoid a safety because that would have been the difference in the game. But here we are, year 6, once again, having questions as to whether or not this offensive line can protect Joe Burrow moving forward. They're going to have to be better. Chase Brown, phenomenal first drive. It was basically a run-heavy first drive that got him the opening score. Problem is, once again, Zach Taylor's play calling, not allowing him to have more carries, when he should have kept it all along, because they had the game virtually, for the most part, under control. It's just the Browns offered, although they had their moments, didn't offer much on the offensive side. The Cincinnati people here is talking about that defense. I'll wait till the weeks 2 through 7 when you talk about playing Jacksonville, Minnesota, Green Bay, Pittsburgh, and Detroit, just to name a few of those teams, before I make my assumptions about that defense. Because you played against a 45-year-old Joe Flacco, and you couldn't get and you barely got the job done. Your biggest lockout was there were 6 drops by the Browns receivers and tight ends. Next week, you're going against Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter. They're not going to be dropping balls. I mean, the front four looks firm, but you guys have work to do moving forward. But for Cleveland, I said they were not going to get 3 to 4 wins this season at the most. I said they was going to lose this one. A lot of Cleveland fans came, at it because of their recent success against the Bengals. And we know the Bengals' week 1 history. They got off the schneid. But moving forward, there's work to do. But for Cincinnati, a W is a W on a Jacksonville. Nothing more than that. Next up is we talk about moving forward. It is the basically the beatdown, which I think would be this kind of a beatdown. I'll admit, it was Indiana beating down Miami, and I'll just acknowledge this when I talk about this. Miami's looked lifeless. That's a dead last thing I expected. I know, I get it. Some people think, rightfully so, Mike McDaniel's on the hot seat. Turn the temperature up, because there was no effort yesterday in this game where Indiana just punked Miami up and down the field. I mean, they made the change to get Daniel Jones as their starting quarterback. Worked out to perfection. I mean, he probably won't play like that for the rest of the way. I mean, they got the touchdown on Michael Pittman. The standout tight end out of Penn State, Tyler Warren, fell into their lap. Phenomenal game in his debut. The defense was just all over, Miami and their receivers. Bad vibes right now in Miami. And, of course, the defense led by Lou Anarumo, the one-time D coordinator here in Cincinnati, working his magic again. Just shutting down a potent offense in Miami and just shut them down. I mean, they got a garbage touchdown after with not much time left. But at the same time, Lou Anarumo just took that team, led by a edge rusher, Latu, can't even pronounce his name, when he had the interception at the end. But the defense cooked. Miami, you have problems. Don't be surprised if this continues. Miami becomes sellers at the trade deadline, because everybody's already talking about what they're going to do with Tyreek Hill. Talk about him going back to Kansas City. But that is what it is at this point. I'll rehash that when trade deadline comes. But there's work to definitely at a crossroads for Miami, because they're not going anywhere at this rate. But a good way to get off the right foot for Indy. They announced Daniel Jones as a starter. He got the opportunity. That's why he got it. Indiana paid him $14 million to get it. He got it, took advantage of it. Now, the Carolina and Jacksonville. I mean, the Jacksonville offense looks real good. I mean, you have the 2 receivers, Hunter and Brian Thomas Jr. The Leon Cohen era gets off good. Travis Etienne just absolutely had a monster game, especially that 70-yarder where he just took it to the house. And basically, after that 70-yarder, the game was over. Carolina, listless to start. Of course, a wild play where Bryce Young throws the ball away on 4th and 1, which, I don't think anyone told him what the real down was. But good win for the Jacksonville. Bryce Young, who people are hit and miss on, not necessarily a good debut. We're going to find out how good this Jacksonville defense is going to be this Sunday, because they're going to Cincinnati to face that receiving core, and they did a heck of a job with shutting down the Carolina offense. They're going against the Cincinnati offense who basically crapped the bed in Cleveland. But I have an itch they're going to wake up this week. And I think that game, Cincinnati and Jacksonville, is going to be a pretty darn good one coming over here. We'll find out in due time. But good one for Jacksonville. Got off on the right foot. Trevor Lawrence looked real good. Can he keep it up? That's going to be the question. Of course, the Raiders over the Patriots. A little bit of a stunner to me because I thought the Patriots would take advantage of their home field. But, they had opportunities but couldn't convert being New England. Alshon Jeffrey showed the whole world why the Raiders were smart in drafting him. Got the touchdown as the game wore on. Started to take over. The defense, big time. And they won that game in Foxborough. I said the AFC West is going to have all 4 teams are going to be better than last season. For this one, it's definitely it. I mean, they look real nice when they went to Foxborough and got the win. I mean, you don't talk about cross-travel teams getting wins that much, but that is what happened yesterday, and they did the job. The defense basically made living heck for Drake May and the Patriots. They couldn't get anything going. Will Campbell, the standout left tackle who they drafted, just got beat up the rest of the way, especially when you're talking about the penalty that got the Patriots forced to punt. But the Patriots, I think, will be fine. The Raiders might be better than people think. Again, it's just one game, but the Raiders look pretty darn good on the road. We can get a road win like the way they did on the road, an opener like the Raiders did. Good for confidence building. And this is my surprise team last season, but they played a lot better than I thought. It was Arizona beating the Saints. We know the Saints are going to be the rock bottom. They're tanking for Arch Manning. Spencer Rattler just looked beyond pathetic. I mean, we all know that. But Kyler Murray looked pretty darn good against a Saints defense, which wasn't necessarily all that good. Basically, led an offense that scored possessions, I think, on their first 3 or 4 possessions. Of course, a shovel that he had to James Conner and the perfectly placed pass over the top to Harrison Jr. This was, I said, Kyler Murray needed to get off to a good start. He did, because he knows it's it for him or not. Otherwise, they would have to look at other options for quarterbacks. But for week 1, this was a team I pegged to have in the 8-9, 9-8 range like last year. I said when they hired Jonathan Gannon a couple years ago, the culture was changing. It got it. Will Johnson, the draft pick, the second-round draft pick, hardly even played, but he's going to get more time. He was targeted 7 times. Receivers only caught 4 for 32 yards. Was a secondary steal, which they needed defense every single which way possible, which what Arizona addressed both in free agency and the draft. And, of course, the wild hit he had on Chris Olave, which I wonder why Chris Olave is still on the Saints when he should be which the Saints should be trying to move on from him, put him in a better situation. But at the end of the day, Arizona got the win on a bigger and better. The game of the day, this one wasn't on I don't think it's on anybody's bingo card as the highest scoring game in the day. It was Pittsburgh beating the Jets. I knew they would win, but to tell me what would have been a score of 34-32, I would have sat back and found out that you need to check for CTE. Because I said this was going to be a game that first went to 20. Actually, the Jets got to 20 by halftime, but they still lost. Aaron Rodgers turned back the clock on this particular day. I mean, absolutely. I mean, basically doing what he can to move the ball, and that's what they did. DK Metcalf had a solid game. Of course, Rodgers got beat up because he's not the most mobile. But the real story here on this one was Jalen Ramsey coming up big down the stretch for the Pittsburgh Steelers with especially the play that broke up the 4th down catch attempt to Garrett Wilson, and that was the ball game. Jalen Ramsey, you can say what you want, still a solid cornerback at this particular stage of his career. Not the top cornerback he was during his years in Jacksonville and LA, but still formidable, still solid. Maybe a change of scenery was needed for him because he basically looked pretty darn good in Pittsburgh after the debacle that's been the last couple of years in Miami. Of course, not too long ago, he had the meniscus injury, but he did make the hard hit that popped the ball loose from Garrett Wilson with the on a 4th and 3 play. Shows he's still one of the better cornerbacks still in the NFL, especially in the AFC. Not the guy he once was. Still formidable, still good, still solid. But if you would have told me before this game, this was going to be the highest scoring game of the entire day, I would have laughed because neither team is going to be known for their offense. Again, it's just 1 week, but good job for the Steelers getting the road win a good, solid performance by Aaron Rodgers. Of course, I'm not sure it's necessary for him to take the shots at the Jets organization as he did in the press conference. But that's what you get with Aaron Rodgers. You always get the good with the bad, the positives and the negatives. The narcissism reveals itself again. He should have just taken the win and just moved on with it because he got it. Of course, big one next week against Seattle with the DK Metcalf playing against his former team. Interesting stat here. Rodgers ties Tom Brady for the most 4 touchdown passes game with no interceptions in NFL history with 28. Who would have thought? You can say a lot of things about Aaron Rodgers, but he knows how to throw the dang football. I'll give him that. I mean, his numbers throughout his career, great. And he's probably going to wind up in the Hall of Fame. Washington over the Giants. Nothing to say here. Jaden Daniels picking it up after his great rookie season. Might be time to start the Jackson Dart experiment in New York. I mean, the Russell Wilson thing is done. And honestly, Russell Wilson's 5 minutes of fame in the NFL are up. Might be time to go to the Jackson Dart experiment. Of course, the stubbornness of Brian Daboll is going to reveal itself. He says Russell Wilson is still the starter. That's why Giants should have canned him before the season started, but they didn't. And now they're going to be stuck with Russell Wilson and another bad loss incoming. Washington looked pretty darn good, especially Deebo Samuel, who they got from the 49ers with a great reverse for the touchdown. Washington, I said they're going to be in the playoffs. They're off on the right track, but it's time to just simply kick the tires off of Russell Wilson, send him out the door, get the Jackson Dart experiment going like right now. I mean, they should have been the starter week 1. I mean, I get it. You made the investment to get him and Jameis Winston. You put Winston in the emergency quarterback status. But now is the time for you guys to just go into the Jackson Dart experiment. You got Malik Neighbors, who's still a formidable, who's still probably one of the premier wide receivers in the NFL, excuse me. But you better get him going. You better get him going now. I don't know what the stubbornness over there in New York, especially with Brian Daboll. That's why they're a laughingstock. That's why they're a clown show. And that's why they're going to be an embarrassment. They're probably going to tank for a top 5 pick again, largely because Brian Daboll isn't ready to move on from Russell Wilson. The defense of the Washington stood out. McLaurin came back after the hold-in, did a phenomenal job there also. It's a good one for Washington. So that was the early game window. Now the late game window, most of it West Coast. Denver over Tennessee. You know, not the rookie debut expected from Cam Ward. I said this team is going to be better, but there's going to be some learning pains and learning curves and growing pains that's going to come. He played the premier defense, probably at least on paper, in the entire league. I mean, we saw what Denver's defense did last season, and they basically just picked it up where they left off. Bo Nix was hit and miss when he threw two interceptions, led to a wild Twitter fights all over the fan bases, whether he's the guy or not. Tennessee is just basically rock bottoming. Denver is going to be fine. I said they needed another receiver opposite Cortland Sutton. I mean, they have Marvin Mims Jr., but other than that, who the heck are they going to go to? They got Evan Ingram, hardly used. But again, that the weight of that team falls on that defense, which has been absolutely stout, and they did it again. And J.K. Dobbins basically continues his resurgence with a solid run for the touchdown that basically iced it. And R.J. Harvey had a great run. Interesting 1-2 punch, fire and ice on that with those two. The run game and the defense is going to lead the way. Rest is going to come down to what Bo Nix can do. He was so yesterday, but again, I'm not a lot of these people who like to have knee-jerk reactions over a week 1 performance. I'll touch on that here in a minute. Great West Coast game, San Fran and Seattle. Of course, George Kittle gets hurt. They brought in Jake Tongs and got the go-ahead touchdown to win it. The debut, Sam Darnold, not all that great. That's why Minnesota didn't extend him. That's why people didn't ride the Sam Darnold bandwagon when he came out of USC. San Fran, I said, I don't even know who their wide receiver core is, but Ricky Purcell was pretty much all I can think of. But credit to Brock Purdy. He persevered, the 49ers defense came up big, and it was the San Francisco 49ers with a great road win. I mean, especially Nick Bosa looked like he, after taking the year off last season, came back and looked pretty darn good at the start. I mean, a lot of people have 49ers winning the NFC West because of the easy schedule, but there's no such thing as an easy schedule. Looks like they're going to be, I think they'll be better, but they got to stay upright and healthy, because now you lost George Kittle probably for a couple of weeks with a hamstring problem. We'll see where that one goes. But interesting stat here. 31st career game for Christian McCaffrey with 50 rushing and 50 receiving yards in a game. Second most NFL history behind Marshall Faulk. Pretty darn elite company. And as long as McCaffrey's healthy, they're going to be fine. But that's the $64 million question. Will Christian McCaffrey stay healthy? Now we go to Green Bay. Of course, the Packers over the Lions. This one I called from the get-go. A lot of Lions fans didn't like it. I picked the Packers to win the division before Micah Parsons. This all but validated it. I mean, the Jordan Love, big game. The Lions offense just absolutely was just locked down. I mean, put on lockdown the entire game by a Packers defense that was top 10 last season. And, of course, the loss of the Lions had offensive coordinator Ben Johnson to Chicago. A lot of people are going to point the fingers at that. I won't go that far as of yet. But the Lions went to Green Bay, and after Green Bay basically I think they got swept by Detroit last season, wanted to make a statement. They did. And the defense has put that Detroit offense on lockdown. The defense of Detroit still pretty questionable. Still, secondary still banged up. But kudos to Isaac to slay with probably the catch of the year. One of the greatest catches you're probably going to see when he had that touchdown with that in a touchdown catch. But still, moving forward, Detroit's going to be fine. A lot of people are putting in this area of Super Bowl window closed, not going to the playoffs. Look, they played a Green Bay team who's probably is as good as anyone in the NFC. And they had the premier quarterback, Jordan Love. He's got a new target in Matthew Golden. The offensive line retooled, did a great job there. They're going to be the favorites. Detroit's going to be fine. A lot of people are calling for the end of the Super Bowl run. Question I have is, have they even made a Super Bowl to consider a Super Bowl run? I mean, they haven't even made a Super Bowl yet. So I don't know what you're talking about, a Super Bowl run. But they'll be fine. They're going to get their 10 to 11 wins and make the playoffs. Calm down. They'll be fine. I mean, I said Green Bay was going to win that division even before the Micah Parsons trade. My point was proven. And one more before we go to the main event. It was Houston losing to the Rams. Matthew Stafford stand out, showing that he can still quarterback. The Rams season relies on the health of Stafford. As long as he's healthy, they're going to be fine. That young defense getting better and getting more vicious. Beat up C.J. Stroud. The Houston Texans invested in that offensive line in the offseason to try and protect C.J. Stroud. So what happens? Week 1 in L.A., Stroud gets beat up again. No excuses for that. You made the investment, it better pays off, because you're fixing to get that guy killed over there in Houston if it doesn't pay off. And C.J. Stroud, when he's upright, is a top 10 quarterback in the entire NFL. But they invested in the trenches. Week 1 didn't pan out good. Granted, they're playing a hungry Rams defense, who can be as good as anyone. Look at that roster, especially when we talk about Jared Verse in the nose tackle position. That team, LA, is going to be an NFC sleeper. They were my pick to come out of the NFC West as a favorites because they're still the proven commodity. All depends on the health of Matthew Stafford. Devontae Adams made his mark as a replacement for Cooper Kupp. But that's how the game went. Solid win at home for LA. Houston's going to be fine as long as the offensive line stands upright and protects C.J. Stroud. They're still probably going to win that division. Again, not a case of overreacting in 1 week. And now we get to the main event. We know what happened last night. Baltimore had the game under control. 4 minutes left. Some way, somehow, they lose it. It's another case, and I try to say this respectfully because everybody knows I get along great with the Ravens flock as a fan of a division rival. It's another case of winning versus not losing. And it's another case, it has been a trend over the last 3 to 4 years for the Ravens, especially their head coach, John Harbaugh, when they have the game under control, the inability to finish and complete as they should. It's been chronicled. 10-point lead, 13-point lead, 14-point lead. Maybe the big one was a few years back when they hosted Miami and it was up 35-7 and turned Tua Tagovailoa into a prime Dan Marino gone left-handed. I mean, that's what happened. And it was ongoing, continuing. And here we are having this conversation again. And I know the Ravens fan base, understandably so, are calling for John Harbaugh's head. I get it. Maybe time to turn the seat on the temperature on his seat a little bit, make it a little warmer. Because let me remind you, I said all along when they won that Super Bowl 47 over San Francisco, it was in spite of him because he was still doing this. Not man back then. He just had a luck. He had two of the premier captains in NFL history on the defensive side, and Ray Lewis and Ed Reed, who did not want to lose, and Joe Flacco, who just played out of his mind during that Super Bowl run and to the Super Bowl win in Super Bowl 47. Since then, John Harbaugh hasn't sniffed anything close. One AFC title game appearance 2 seasons ago, losing at home to Kansas City. And it's another case of where when things get tough, they rather stick to not losing the game. It's not just him. It's an ongoing thing throughout the entire league and all sports landscapes have this. You go for the kill, or you're just going to be content with just trying to win and hope something goes your way. Biggest problem with this is the Ravens defense in the second half decided to take a nap in the locker room and watch Josh Allen show the whole world why he was the MVP last season. And he just took over, and we know the rest of his history. What happened last night was just a trend over the last 3.5 years of, again, John Harbaugh, the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, who I give a lot of respect to because he won a Super Bowl and he had the Ravens winning well, just not able to close the deal on a big game where he needed to go for it all. I mean, that punt in the fourth quarter was just on 4th and 2 was inexcusable because, let me remind you, I know Derrick Henry had the fumble the possession before, but he and Lamar Jackson were just shredding the Bills' defense. I mean, what made you decide the punt, especially knowing your defense just got absolutely roasted in that second half when Josh Allen came out a different player? That is where John Harbaugh needs to accept accountability, and something needs to be given accountability-wise. Now, no one's saying John Harbaugh is a bad coach. I mean, that's just stupid talk. I mean, the guy has an outstanding winning percentage of Baltimore. He won the Super Bowl. Say what you want about it. But some of his decision-making over the last few years, especially when you talk about the fact that this guy has I believe, at least 8 to 9 losses where they've been up by at least 13-plus points, and the ability to not close it out speaks volumes. And it's gonna. There's some questions that need to be answered over there in Baltimore. And I say this wholeheartedly and respectfully because I know a lot of Ravens fans are going crazy right now, calling for his head. I mean, he made some decisions that make you scratch your head. Because I still remember that 2019 home playoff loss to Tennessee, the look on his face when Tennessee turned it up and just shut down that Baltimore offense. That look tells you everything you know about John Harbaugh. And I like the heck out of John Harbaugh. He's a good coach, good guy. But when this is a trend over 3 to 4 years, and there's nothing that's being done of significance, something is a head scratcher somewhere. I'm not going to go as far as saying it's a problem, but it is a head scratcher. I understand why the Ravens fans feel the way they do. I understand every one of the Ravens, radio airways or whatever, make the opinions they do. I understand it. They're still going to win their 12 to 13 games and win the AFC North. They're still the best team there. Well, I think Pittsburgh might challenge it the way they looked yesterday. But when does winning 12 to 13 games and winning the division no longer just good enough? Because that's where it's about to get to. And we consider what happened last night, which is just the epitome of what's happened to Baltimore in big games over the last 3 years, especially in the regular season, where they had games locked up and couldn't finish the job. When is something going to be answered? because there's going to be some questions, and there has to be questions now because it's not just a one-time thing. It's been a common thing for the last 3 years, and somebody needs to give some real answers to this. Unreal. And they're still a top three AFC team with Buffalo and Kansas. But it goes back to what I said last year. You can't handle your games like this in week one. If you don't think it's going to bite you in the end, wait till the season plays out. The only way it won't happen is if Buffalo somehow just crashes and burns, which is not going to happen because they have one of the four easier schedules in the league this season. But a lot of questions need to be answered in Baltimore right now when it comes to why this is a common trend over the last 3 seasons. I mean, not just we're not talking about a 10-point game where it's just 2 possessions, and in today's NFL you can get 2 scores, and how the NFL is today. They've had 17-point, 21-point, and in the case of the loss to Miami in 2022, a 28-point lead, and somehow, some way, lost it. A lot of questions need to be answered, and it's a trend that's a head scratcher. I understand what's going on in Baltimore. I try to give the ultimate respect, but I get why you guys are frustrated and mad because that roster, you've had talented rosters over the last 3 to 4 years. You should have been have at least a Super Bowl appearance out of it. Yeah, I agree with you guys on one thing. Questions really need to be answered. The rest of it is just, emotional opinions, but I get it. But for Josh Allen, best quarterback in the NFL, probably right now by default until Patrick Mahomes gets going, then we'll have another conversation. Show the whole world, why he was worthy of that award, at least in his eyes, into the eyes of Bills Mafia. Stand-up performance, just kept going and kept going. Of course, questions going to be asked. Who won it? Who lost it? If there's a giver, there has to be a taker. Ravens handed it to Buffalo. Buffalo said, we'll take it, and they ran with it. But the game of the year, I don't think any game the rest of the season is going to top that. But great game all the way around. Lots of questions still need to be answered, but let's just enjoy that moment because you don't get week one NFL games at that level between 2 premier teams in the same conference playing at a playoff level the way both teams did. And it was just a sensational game all the way around. Kudos to both. Now, one of my favorite topics we're talking about is always after week one, we're talking about overreactions. I will shoot a few of these down here because I crack up at all the things that will happen after week one with certain teams and certain things. Well, let's start with number 1. Over here in Cincinnati, they're talking about the defense. The defense shut down a 45-year-old Joe Flacco. That wasn't Lamar Jackson or Jordan Love or Josh Allen. It was a 45-year-old Joe Flacco. And Browns offense is not going to amount to much. Nice pieces on that roster who played well, and the defense is stout. Don't get me wrong. But the Bengals defense shut down a 45-year-old Joe Flacco who hasn't been much outside of coming off the couch and leading Cleveland to the playoffs. But we saw what happened in that playoff game in Houston where that Houston defense just beat them up and was opportunistic. Not worth bragging about because you shut down a 45-year-old quarterback who basically, I wonder why the guy's even getting a start at this point. And the Bengals brass acted like shutting down the Cleveland Browns offense was the equivalent of the 2000 Ravens. That's the problem with the Bengals fan base again, and that's why the moronism shows and their cowardice shows. You played the Cleveland Browns offense and you shut down a 45-year-old Joe Flacco. Do that against Jordan Love, Trevor Lawrence, Lamar Jackson, and Josh Allen. Then color me impressed. I will give you guys one thing. One thing. A physical Cleveland offensive line, the Bengals defensive front held their own and did a pretty darn good job. That I'll give you, but that's it. That defense, otherwise, your biggest luck out throughout the game as Cleveland looked like they were starting to make their move was drop passes. You're going to be playing receivers who are not going to drop passes like Cleveland did. We talk about Amon-Ra Brown, Shakir, Zay Flowers, among others, Matthew Golden, Justin Jefferson. We'll see how good you guys are then, because all you guys are in full arousal mode because you guys shut down the Cleveland Browns and a 45-year-old Joe Flacco. Pause a little bit, because there's still a lot of errors that need to be corrected. Everybody talks about the Detroit Lions so-called Super Bowl window closed. Question I have is, how the hell is a Super Bowl window closed when you haven't been to a Super Bowl? I mean, what is a Super Bowl? I have a Super Bowl window when you haven't been there. They're still going to make the playoffs. Yes, they didn't look all that good against Green Bay, but let me remind you again, Green Bay had a top 10 offense and defense last season. They added Micah Parsons to the defense, got Matthew Golden as a wide receiver, as a top target for Jordan Love. And I said they were going to win the division before the Parsons trade. Yesterday basically validated it. Detroit is going to be fine. I know teams are, 50-50 when it comes to Jared Goff. He's going to be fine. They ran into a defense that put that offense on lockdown yesterday, and Green Bay just locked them up. You guys in Baltimore, I just mentioned this earlier. The world is not coming to an end. You're going to win your 12, 13 games and win the AFC North because you're still the best team in that division by a landslide. But I'll just say this again. Just winning the division and making the playoffs no longer good enough. With that roster you have, you should be aiming higher and finding ways to get higher. And that's going to be the question moving forward in Baltimore. But the roof is not falling off. Everything's going to be just fine. But when it comes to playoff seeding, we'll talk about that when it gets to that point. You guys will be fine. Move on to Cleveland, which I think you're going to handle business week 2, and we'll just go from there. Once again, the issue of Houston's quarterback, C.J. Stroud, getting beat up again by the offensive line. They played a tough Rams defense, and a really darn good Rams defense, by the way, who's young and hungry. I mean, they get after it when they want to. But you didn't make that investment in the offensive line just to see that happen for a second straight year. You know what happened last year in the divisional round against Kansas City? You got him nearly killed. I expect them to pick themselves up, and they're going to be fine. And speaking of Kansas City, everyone's talking about the ship falling off with the Chiefs, after losing to the Chargers. Justin Herbert played a whale of a game, a darn near perfect game by his standards. Kansas will be fine. They're not going anywhere. They still have Andy Reid. They still have Patrick Mahomes. They'll find a way to figure it out. They're going to get Rashid Rice back after his suspension. And I know Xavier Worthy's going to be week to week with his shoulder. They're going to be fine. Defense needs some retooling a little bit. Actually, I think they figured it out a little bit in the second half, but it was too little too late. They're going to be fine. They're not going to go anywhere. They're still the team to beat in the AFC until someone goes to Arrowhead or plays them in the playoffs and knocks them out. And that hasn't happened in the AFC playoffs outside of Cincinnati in 2021, but we know that was gift wrapped. I can talk about more overreactions. The Micah Parsons, last one I'll touch on this. The Micah Parsons effect. Let me remind people, you know what they did in 1996 when they got Reggie White from Philadelphia? It's looking like it's going to be the same darn thing because that Green Bay defense went to a whole new level yesterday. And they're going to be a problem for anyone. Now, touch on my conversation what I talked about briefly, winning versus not losing. And there's a lot of this in today's NFL. We talk about teams and coaches. The inability to close teams out when you're up, that's why they say no lead is safe. Until the clock says zeros across the board, as the great Herm Edwards would eloquently say, you play to win the game. We have, and I've seen this at least a half dozen times in the games I watched yesterday, where coaches and teams get ultra conservative and have a reactive approach to what they see. And they get fidgety, they get nervous, they get anxious, and resort to let's keep it safe mode. Just because you're up doesn't mean you can keep it safe. And we saw what happened last night in Buffalo as a result. I mean, that game was just gift wrapped and handed to them on a silver platter. Largely from the Baltimore side, because John Harbaugh went to playing not to lose, mismanaging the game again. Yes, there was that Derrick Henry fumble in there, which Henry has owned it, and we know Derrick Henry hardly fumbles it. But what does it say? You're 4th and 3 when you have Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, who was just basically doing whatever they want for the most part to that Buffalo defense, putting the ball away and trying to rely on a defense who was just getting cooked by Josh Allen in the second half at the end. Do you not trust your quarterback and running back? Or did something happen that you didn't like? That's always been a problem with all sports, not just in the NFL or not just last night's game. All sports. I mean, I get it. If when you're up, you don't want to take any wild chances. But it's on my boxing analogy. I'll tell you, you're up big on the scorecards. They tell you, be a needle in a haystack. Don't just run and kill the clock. Throw enough punches just to keep the opponent off balance, away from you, so nothing happens. That's how teams, especially in the NFL, with how NFL is constructed today, should be. Go out there, get the win. Forget about the clock. Forget about the scoreboard. If you're playing the scoreboard, you're not really showing any real confidence. Forget what the scoreboard says. It can be 88 to nothing, and you're still playing to win. Just get out there and win the game. That's what it comes down to. I get it. I get it. People want to take the safe approach when they're up and the game is up by eight or nine possessions and the game is over. I get it. But don't act like, just ignore the scoreboard. Go out there and just play as if the scoreboard doesn't even exist. Because if you don't, you saw what happened to Buffalo last night. I'll be having more conversations about that later. That concludes the NFL segment. More tomorrow and the days to come. Of course, week 2 coming up. Now to the historical aspect of boxing. And of course, we had some rival games in the NFL: Bengals, Browns, Lions, Packers. Let me introduce you to one of the wildest and some of the dirtiest rivalries in boxing history. This was the third of their fourth fight that took place 75 years ago between standout featherweights Willie Pep and Sandy Saddler. The synopsis of this particular 4-fight series: you had 2 of the 4 greatest featherweights of all time going at it the other way. Willie Pep, Sandy Saddler. When we talk about the elite level, that was elite level. Let me remind you guys, this is before Ali Frazier, Holyfield, Bo, Barrera Morales. This is even before Sugar Ray Robinson versus Jake LaMotta. That's how far back this rivalry was, especially talking about south of Sugar Ray Robinson. I would say the heavyweight division, but at that time, it was in a bit of a transitional phase after the Joe Louis retirement. But when you think about this 4-fight series between Willie Pep and Sandy Saddler, skill, will, but also lines were toed and crossed because the fight series, because of the bad mesh and styles, was what Willie Pep and Sandy Saddler had in this 4-fight series. And we go back to what took place 75 years ago today in this particular fight. Willie Pep showed his mastery again, but the physicality of Sandy Saddler showed itself, and once again, Willie Pep was forced to sit on the stool because of a shoulder injury. Of course, there was this theory that Willie Pep had a accident beforehand, and he was probably never the same after that, which I'll give it that. When you coined the phrase "beautiful style" in all sports for that time, and really in all sports, especially in boxing, nobody had it like Willie Pep. Some are given the distinction of the greatest defensive fighter of all time, or others might have a close distinction. But in terms of natural gifts, Willie Pep was it. Being a 2-time featherweight champion, of course, won it in the rematch with Saddler, and probably his greatest performance, where he basically perfected the fight against Saddler to keep Saddler from opposing his will. We talk about the second fight, the performance of perfection. Sandy Saddler, one of the more brutal punchers in that weight class nobody had ever heard of. And for that time, we talk about featherweight power. Maybe the hardest puncher in that division, maybe in history in that division, was Sandy Saddler. And this was your perfect styles make fights, perfect foils. But you talk about a rivalry that was marred by fouls in the ring and hatred outside of it, because that's what we had with this. And we talk about this third fight here. Willie Pep had this fight under control. It was seemed on his way to a decision win. Now, before the fight was stopped, let me remind everyone, the fight community, it wasn't the point system, it was the round system. Two judges had Pep winning 5 rounds, another one had him winning 4 rounds until the shoulder injury took place. And we talk about the physicality that took place between Pep and Saddler and their styles. It got dirty, it got nasty, and basically it was foul prone all over the place, bodies flying all over the floor. That was how Sandy Saddler had to find a way to get to Willie Pep, because Pep was basically giving him a boxing lesson. And Saddler had to get rough, and then of course Pep got rough back, and it got real nasty between the two of them. And it was 75 years ago today, in the third of their 4-fight series, Sandy Saddler beat Willie Pep to become the featherweight champ for a second time. They had another 4th fight a year later. The story about the 4th fight was the fouls got so out of control. Both fighters were suspended, had their licenses revoked for the longest time, because that rivalry was wild and dirty. We look at that part of the Saddler Pep rivalry. Before Ali Frazier, before Robinson Lombarda, it was Willie Pep and Sandy Saddler. It had every bit the goods, every bit the intensity, and every bit the edginess that Ali Frazier, Robinson Lombarda had in their rivalries, because it got wild and it got nasty. When we talk about Sandy Saddler, probably rated one of the 100 hardest hitters in boxing history, especially in that weight class, was a brutal puncher. And an interesting tidbit for, especially those in the R&B music community, his nephew is none other than the standout Grandmaster Flash. You know, the Grandmaster Flash of the Furious 5 of the song The Message. Broken glass everywhere, people bleeping on the stage, you know they just don't care. Yeah, that's Sandy Saddler. Actually, if you look at the photo, you can see some resemblances. But in terms of pure, rough, tough, and hard power in the featherweight division back in the 1950s in that weight class, Sandy Saddler was a cream of the crop. And it was that as he started wearing down Willie Pep in the 3rd fight. Granted, the Pep's shoulder injury didn't help, but Saddler went on to become the world featherweight champ for a second time. And we talk about all-time great featherweights, widely regarded with these two as the top 2 of all time. I mean, you can throw in a Henry Armstrong in there. Of course, the late Salvador Sanchez. You know, probably the one that came closest to challenging those guys, because for the longest time, Pep, Saddler, and Armstrong were the cream of the crop. And they were like so far up there, you couldn't catch them. Sanchez was closing in after he obliterated Wilfredo Gomez, but we know the unfortunate tragedy that happened. So there's those guys. Of course, Alexis Arguello, the standout Nicaraguan, before he went up to some of the junior lightweight and lightweight, was a premier featherweight. We talk about fighters who are a beauty to watch. Alexis Arguello was on that list. Just did everything to mere perfection. When he hit you, he landed, and when he landed, he did damage. That was Alexis Arguello, just like Sandy Saddler. Not with a bit of the attitude Saddler has, because Arguello had a charm and grace that was polarizingly different from what Sandy Saddler was. Go back to the 1900s, a fighter named Abe Attell, probably the original greatest featherweight of all time, before Pep and Saddler. He's in that conversation. Tony Canzanori, the 3-division world champ, one of the first 3-division world champs, along with Henry Armstrong and Barney Ross. Vicente Saldivar doesn't get talked about enough, also in that conversation. A fellow named Kid Chocolate out of Cuba, known for obliterating Benny Bass in 7 rounds to become Cuba's first world champ. He's in that conversation. And of course, we go more modern. The big 3 out of Mexico, Eric Morales, Marco Antonio Barrera, and Juan Manuel Marquez, definitely in that conversation. And probably a guy that was, even though he fought at super featherweight, but also in that conversation, Gennaro Hernandez. I mean, no one's going to mistake Hernandez for being the greatest thing since sliced bread, but at a solid long run as a super featherweight champ on 2 separate occasions. And Azuma Nelson won featherweight and super featherweight titles. I remind you, when I talk about the greatest of all time, it's about the old school 8. And this was basically featherweight and super featherweight when you talk about the names I mentioned. I mean, you could probably throw in the guys at junior featherweight also, but it's a bit of a broader landscape when you talk about the old school 8. Because I've said all along, one of the biggest downfalls of the sport was too many weight classes. And that's why we should have stuck to the old school 8 and left it at that. Why do people need to go to the junior and super route? Who knows? But we talk about epic all-time rivalries in not boxing, but all the sports. Before all of us knew about some of the rivalries we knew today. I mean, Manning versus Brady, Chiefs Bills with Mahomes and Allen. You would say Allen and Lamar Jackson. Of course, Ohio State, Michigan, USC, Notre Dame, Yankees, Red Sox, even the boxing areas, Ollie Frazier, Holyfield, Bo, Robinson, LaMotta, and even Ezra Charles versus Jersey Joe Walcott. Before all of those, it was Willie Pep and Sandy Saddler. And we talk about rivalries. There was one with these two, and boy, it got almost downright nasty because lines were nearly crossed. The lines were towed and stepped on. Fouls were committed to the point to where sanctions had to be handed down to both fighters after their fourth fight, which was basically a physical mess, legally and illegally. That's what happened during the rivalry from 1948 to 1951. But it was 75 years ago today. Sandy Saddler hit his peak by regaining the featherweight championship from Willie Pep after Pep beat Saddler in the second fight to have the distinction of the featherweight champion of the world. Little big men rivalries, there's a little ooze when it comes to little big men rivalries in boxing, okay? I mean, we talk about with Morales and Barrera more modern, but when it hits at a lower level, I mean, nobody talks about those as much as the heavyweights, obviously, because we talk about to the casual fan, it's always going to be the heavyweights. But with this one, we talk about little big men, there's an extra passion and an extra sizzle because of that passion and the desire to win that makes those little division rivalries stand out just as much as the heavyweights. I mean, I talked about Morales and Barrera in the early 2000s. That was a fun rivalry, the post-Julio Cesar Chavez era. But when you talk about that sort of thing, Willie Pep and Sandy Saddler was basically one of a kind, and it certainly was. It was also one of a kind because they both, at the end of the day, you could legitimately argue they have the distinction of being the two greatest featherweights to ever step foot in a boxing ring. People give Pep 1, Saddler 2. Some people say Saddler gets the nod because of the 3-1 series over Pep, but Pep has a longer reigns as the featherweight champion, so he probably gets the nod there. Take your pick, whatever you like. But the distinction of the two greatest featherweights in the history of the featherweight division in boxing more than likely belongs to Willie Pep and Sandy Saddler. And it was 75 years ago today, the apex of that rivalry, when Sandy Saddler reclaimed the World Featherweight Championship. He lost to Willie Pep a year before. And that rivalry just got absolutely crazy. We're talking about everything that happened from this fight into the fourth fight and all the sanctions that were handed down to both fighters. That's what rivalries were back then. I could compile a whole lot of more rivalries in all kinds of sports. I could talk about rivalries all day. This one stands out in its own unique way because we don't have Robinson LaMotta or Ali Frazier rivalries without this, because this is before all of that took place. This is even before people even knew what the word rivalry was. Back then, it was classified as hatred. I mean, and of course, there was bad blood at the time between the two fighters where Pep felt Saddler was a little too physical. The fights basically validated his point. But of course, Saddler basically says to Willie Pep, make the excuse you want. I still beat you 3 out of 4 times. That's what kind of a rivalry Willie Pep and Sandy Saddler was back in those days. And we're not talking about just any kind of rivalry. High-level rivalry for the distinction of being the greatest in the history of your division at that time. Everything was on the line. And I mean everything. Put the chips on the poker table, push it out. That's the kind of rivalry Pep versus Saddler was. The two greatest featherweights of all time. Henry Armstrong probably has a case for being in the middle of there, as well as Salvador Sanchez. But widely considered the two greatest featherweights of all time, Willie Pep, Pep-Saddler. That was a rivalry. They don't make rivalries like that anymore. Now, it's basically, yeah, we hate you during the game, but then, of course, you see all the handshakes and hug and love after the games. Fine by me, though. But these two guys just genuinely despise one another for many reasons. It spilled over. The sanctions were handed, but they still managed to move on with their careers and still have the distinction of the two greatest fighters to ever fight in the featherweight division in boxing history. Fun times. Sometimes you just wish you could find a time warp, go back to that era, relive it, and see it for yourself. Because you can put all the articles you want on these sites, you can put all the footage you want, but until you get to in-depth knowledge and understanding the stories of a lot of these athletes, not just boxing or the NFL, all athletes, soccer, baseball, basketball, even a sport like golf or some MMA or UFC, karate, whatever. You would like to see the stories in person so you can sit back and tell stories like this when you get older. Sometimes you wish you could do that. I mean, too bad they don't make time warps or time machines, because otherwise I'd be doing it and probably doing my shows from back in the 50s and 60s. Probably the black and white where you guys have to have the antenna ears with 80 layers of aluminum foil. That's what I got to say about that. And that'll wrap up this edition of Sir Hunt on X. I hope everyone had themselves a wonderful 8th of September 2025. To all my 32, the fans of all my 32 NFL teams, it's week 1. Calm down. The Bengals defense wasn't all that great. Baltimore's going to be fine. Detroit's going to be fine. Kansas City's going to be fine. Don't overreact, because there's still 17 weeks to go. Of course, this week is fight week with Naoya Inoue versus MJ Akinlanomi, or whatever you pronounce his name is, over there in Japan, coming up on Sunday afternoon. I'll be touching on that later this week. For those that missed my show tonight or any of my shows in the past, it will be able to listen to the audio versions on the Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, and Spotify apps. Soon to come, the website is in construction. Going to put the final touches. That announcement is going to be coming soon. Bigger things coming up for me later this week. Of course, October 16th, I will be live from Cincinnati for the live preview of the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cincinnati Bengals. Good divisional matchup there. Going to take my show on the road like I did last year. And as always, make self-care your number one priority in life. If you take care of yourself first, all the good things come your way. Always focus on you first. Because if you don't take care of yourself first, nothing else is going to matter. Always focus on you. And on that note, I will wrap this up. Have a good rest of the night. Take care of yourselves. God bless. Enjoy the night. I'll be back tomorrow night, and I'll talk to you guys then.